What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel. So once again, we're going to take a look at some older technology today, some older phones. I really need to switch up. I need to start doing other things, dude. I need to start doing tablets again. I did the iPad mini 4 not too long ago, but the Google Pixel, the original one, was one of the most interesting phones I think was ever released. And my English is going to be all over the place in this video. But the weird thing though is that honestly, when the Google Pixel came out for the first time, like when it was released, I was kind of sad about it. I was like, why are they taking this approach? Like, I feel like they should have kept up the Nexus line. I personally was obsessed with the Nexus line. When the Pixel came out, I think I was still using an Android at the time, and I literally loved the Google Pixel phone. I think they were like an amazing set of phones. I think they're still doing pretty well, even with the Pixel 4 and 4 XL. But coming from the Nexus line, I was so used to seeing like, oh my god, this is the new Nexus phone, this is the new Nexus 6P, and I think they switched it up at the Nexus 6P mark because they had the 5X and the 6P, and that's when they started branching out and making two separate phones, like with the smaller variant and the bigger model. Then with the Google Pixel, I was like, I wish they just made one standard model that wasn't like a big size or a small size. But since then, we've seen the Google Pixel line kind of take shape and take form, and even now they're still super relevant. A lot of people still talk about them, mostly because of their controversies. I think with the original Google Pixel, there weren't really that many controversies going on with it. The Pixel 2 was okay. People were complaining about the screen being pink or something like that. Then we had the 3 XL, and now even the 4 XL, people are complaining about that, including myself. I'm complaining about that heavily. But the original Google Pixel came out in 2016 in October, so it's actually a little bit over 3 years old at this point. And honestly, I think this phone has held up well in some areas and really, really bad in some other areas. So looking at the front, you can see this is one of the areas that this phone completely messed up on. I mean, I don't know what Google was thinking when they were making this phone. It has a 5-inch 1080p AMOLED display on the front, and you can probably say that, okay, like, this phone came out at a time literally just a couple months before the bezel-less trend was happening. But even in 2016, man, like this thing had so much bezel. This thing had more bezel than the iPhone 7 and 7 Plus at the time, which was pretty crazy because those phones actually had use for the bezel that had a home button there. But the Pixel really had no reason to have those big of front bezels, at least on the front. And even with the Pixel 2 and the Pixel 3, like there's no reason those bezels needed to be that big. I understand the front speakers and everything, but with the original Google Pixel, dude, this phone has not held up well in terms of the way it looks. That's probably the best way to put it. And that's really the only main area that this phone really messed up on. I mean, when you're using a phone, that's the one thing you're using all the time. And even when I'm messing with it now, this phone just looks like a budget phone, or this phone just looks like some like Motorola phone from like 2013 that was like $50. Like it looks one of those phones, and it's really, really bad. And it's not one of those phones, but it looks like it. It looks even worse than like the Nexus 4 and all those, but that's just the way it looks, you know what I mean? Looks can be deceiving, and this phone, even though it doesn't look that great, the usability of this phone is still very, very high, and it's still super up there in my opinion. Now, on the back we have a glass like on half of it, and the fingerprint sensor right there, a single facing camera, and a headphone jack and USB Type-C on the bottom. We also have USB Type-C and a headphone jack on this phone too, which I guess is really cool. And in terms of the outside, that's really pretty much it. No IP certification. It was like splash and dust resistant, but there's no IP certification for this thing. So in terms of the way it looks and feels, it doesn't look that great. It feels kind of good, you know, it doesn't feel like a super cheap phone, but I'll definitely tell you the looks of this phone are probably one of the worst things about it. But I wouldn't hate on it too much just because of that, in my opinion. Now, moving on to the software side of things, this thing was released with Android 7.1 Nougat. You are able to upgrade it to Android 10, and I don't think it's going to go any further than that. It's almost 99% positive that it's going to stop at Android 10, and that's not really a bad thing either. I mean, Android 10 was pretty good. Moving on to the next version of Android, I mean, it can go further, I guess, but it's perfectly fine where it's at. But the one thing you can always do, you can always root this thing and custom ROM it, because this thing is a Google phone. Google does a really, really good job at keeping their phone stock Android, not full of bloat and stuff. And because they do that, you can easily go and, you know, unlock the bootloader of this phone and be pretty much set. So even though it's not necessarily like, you know, going to get the next version of Android, third-party development will make it so you can go and just install the next version if you want to. But this thing, because it is a Google Pixel phone, one of the biggest advantages is the software support. So even though this thing came out in 2016, it got many versions of Android for an Android phone. It's probably the longest lasting Android phone on stock, Android for that matter, so that's a really, really good thing. And that's one of the biggest advantages a lot of people were to go pick up a Google Pixel, was because of that specific software updates. And even now, with the whole camera situation and all those things, like the lack of 4K at 60 frames on the Google Pixel 4 XL, a lot of people complain about that, including me, but then you have to look back at, oh my god, but the software support is really good on the thing. So it's like, you can't have everything, you can only have some things, but with the Google Pixel, they did a really good job at extending the software support. So that pretty much covers that up. Now moving on to the performance side of things, this thing was released with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 821 chipset, a quad-core CPU, an Adreno 530 GPU, and 4 gigabytes of RAM. And what I can tell you is that in terms of performance, this phone has held up pretty well in the performance category in my opinion. Now, I think that has a lot to do with the stock Android side of things. It doesn't really have a lot of bloatware in the background. But also another thing to keep in mind is that this phone does have, not that bad of a processor. It's not like a completely slow phone at all. I have seen some cases where it does stutter. It doesn't really do that great in terms of higher end gaming and things like that, but it's not completely bad either. And the one thing I do like about that extra bezel on the side of the screen is that if you're playing like a super intensive game on the side, like Real Racing 3, for example, it gives you something to kind of grip onto, which is really nice. With all these new phones like my iPhone 11 Pro and like the OnePlus 7 Pro, it's not hard to play a game, but it just kind of, it's a little difficult here and there. But in terms of, the lighter end tasks and apps and things like that, they work perfectly fine. If you have to do multiple Google Sheets or Google Docs or going on the Chrome browser and going things like that, you're going to be perfectly fine. That's not going to be that big of an issue. If you go to like the mid-tier apps, like go into like play like some Paper IO game and then go to like some other thing, you're going to be fine too. Like it's not going to be that big of a deal. Like I said, the only issue is maybe going into the higher end gaming and the kind of multitasking between that. The biggest issue is that this phone only has 4 gigabytes of RAM, and that's kind of where the main issue lies. You can get things up, you can get things loaded, but when you go start doing multiple things, that's when things start kind of, getting affected and apps start closing in the background. And they didn't really even increase the RAM until the Google Pixel 4 of this year, which is insane. I don't know why they did that. They really need to start getting their game together and start, making more of an effort to increase the RAM and increase the power. The Pixel 4 XL is really powerful, but the Pixel of this time, and even compared to a lot of the competition, I mean, they could have done a lot better in my opinion. But in terms of performance, that's pretty much it. Yes, it could be better, but it's really not even that bad in 2019. I think it's actually on the better side, for a 3-year-old phone in my opinion. Now hitting on the camera, like I said, the Pixel was really known for its camera, and that's why a lot of people got upset with the Pixel 4 and the 4 XL. It has a single 12.3 megapixel camera. You can shoot 4K at 30 frames, and it's a really good sensor. Don't get me wrong, it has a lot going for it. The features are kind of lackluster. Again, there's not really a lot of features going on with it, but in terms of the quality itself, it's actually really, really good in my opinion. And I'm not the one to be like, oh my god, this camera quality is the best, this and that. I honestly don't really care that much, even though I make all those videos on those camera comparisons and everything. I think in terms of the way the camera looks, and when I take a photo, it looks really nice and everything, I think that's all that really matters. There's really not that many features going for it. Like I said, you can't shoot 4K 60 frames, you don't have, 4K at the front camera or 1440p, you have an 8 megapixel front facing camera. What I can tell you is in terms of the camera quality and the camera sensor, it's very, very good. It still holds up quite well. You don't have an ultra wide sensor, you don't have a telephoto lens, and even though the quality might be great, that's probably one of the biggest disadvantages of this phone. The newer phones do have some type of capability, either one or the other or both. This phone does not have either one, so that's really the only thing it's missing in my opinion. Now moving on to the battery life, this thing had a 2770 mAh battery, and again, it's not one of the highlights of this phone for sure. Even when this thing was released, I heard a lot of people complaining about the battery. I owned this thing when it was released, and I didn't really notice it that badly, but it was kind of a little weird. The Pixel XL had a much bigger battery, and I actually liked that one a lot more. But with the standard Google Pixel, it should have had at least like a 3000 mAh battery. I know that doesn't really make that much of a difference, but it would have made some difference, and it would have made this phone much more appealing in my opinion. In terms of the 2770 mAh battery, I mean, it's whatever. It's not at that full 2770 though. It's definitely depreciated and it degraded over time. So what I can tell you is in terms of the battery life, it could have been better. They should have made it better. It's not removable. You can't do anything about it. And ultimately, I do wish they put a bigger battery in it at the end of the day. So to kind of sum up the whole entire thing, man, the Google Pixel is a tremendous phone, don't get me wrong. It brought a lot to the table, kind of. It's still getting software support until the end of Android 10. It's pretty powerful. The RAM maybe is one of the biggest issues with this thing. It doesn't have that much RAM. The looks of this phone, it doesn't really look like the most premium thing in the world. It has a lot of bezel, and it's so unnecessary in my opinion, but it's there, so you can't do anything about it. It has the fingerprint sensor, which I like a lot. The build quality isn't that bad, just the screen on the front. The screen itself though is pretty good in my opinion. And to kind of sum up the whole entire thing, is the Pixel still worth it? Yes, I think it's still worth it. I think all the anomalies with it, the bezel and whatever else I complain about, like those things, yeah, they kind of get in the way and kind of get in the way of the experience overall, but I think it's a tremendous phone either or. And if you can spend a little bit more money, I would recommend getting the Google Pixel 2 XL. I love that phone a lot. That phone is definitely better than the Pixel and it looks much better too. So I'd definitely recommend that one over this one. But that pretty much covers it, guys. If you have any other questions, if you actually want to pick up a Pixel or a Pixel 2 XL, I'll find the cheapest ones on Amazon and I'll link them straight down in the description below so you guys can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. That's pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section as well. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it would mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys could check it out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.